Been reading international headlines lately. You might think the U.S. and Ethiopia just had this massive romantic reunion.
Yeah, a complete, sweeping, strategic reset, right?
Exactly. You see the photos of diplomats shaking hands, the press releases filled with all that soaring rhetoric.
All the smiles and flags.
Right. But today, our mission is to cut through that celebratory noise. Because behind those handshake photos, both sides are actually quietly preparing for a geopolitical storm.
Oh, absolutely.
So we're taking a deep dive into what is actually driving this sudden engagement. And frankly, for you listening, the reality is far more calculated and far more cynical than the diplomatic press releases suggest.
I mean, official statements are really just designed to project stability. They talk about shared values and all that.
But shared values have very little to do with it.
Very little. What we're witnessing right now is a high stakes recalibration, and it is driven entirely by regional survival.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to decode what's actually happening, we're relying on a fascinating piece of analysis by Dr. Shumet Mengistu Ngusu.
Right, his breakdown of Cameron Hudson's work.
Yeah, Hudson is a former U.S. diplomat and a major expert on the Horn of Africa. And his read on this supposed reunion completely strips away all the idealism.
Which is really the only way to accurately read this situation.
Right, we have to look at this strictly through the cold logic of regional power dynamics.
Yeah, if you try to apply a traditional romanticized view of international relations here, looking for good guys, bad guys, unbreakable alliances, you are going to profoundly misunderstand the board.
Well, let's start with the words they're using, because the media keeps throwing around the phrase strategic reset.
They love that term.
They really do.
Hmm?
But in diplomacy, a reset isn't just a casual update. It implies wiping the slate clean entirely.
Exactly. It suggests past grievances are just forgiven, core philosophies align, and you're committing to this long-term transformational alliance.
But Hudson argues that is absolutely not what's happening on the ground between Washington and Addis Ababa,
Far from it. Hudson completely rejects the term strategic reset. He uses a much more clinical phrase, actually.
which is
A pragmatic recalibration.
pragmatic recalibration. Okay, so instead of a dramatic vow renewal after a breakup, this is more like two neighbors who haven't spoken in years suddenly deciding they need to fix the shared fence before a storm hits.
That is a perfect way to put it, yeah. A reset is a fundamental change in the relationship. A pragmatic recalibration just means the external environment got so dangerous that both sides had to adjust to survive.
So it's a delayed, kind of grudging return to structured engagement.
Very grudging. And what's fascinating here is just how grudging it really is. To understand that, the text points us to a crucial piece of recent history with the GER.
The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, right?
Exactly. For anyone who hasn't followed it closely, the GRD is not just some local infrastructure project. It's a massive hydroelectric dam on the Blue Nile.
And it controls the water flowing downstream to Sudan and, crucially, to Egypt.
Right, and Egypt is a major historical U.S. ally.
So Washington obviously got involved.
They tried to. The U.S. stepped in to mediate this incredibly tense standoff, and Ethiopia essentially just walked away from Washington's proposals.
Wait, really? They just brushed off the U.S.?
They did. Washington came to the table leaning on its weight as a global superpower, offering frameworks to resolve the dispute, and Addis Ababa effectively said, no thanks.
But wait, let me push back on that for a second. Ethiopia still relies heavily on international financial systems, right?
Yeah.
And foreign aid.
Yes, heavily.
So how does a nation in that position just ignore the United States on a massive regional security issue? Weren't they taking a huge risk of total isolation?
They were taking a calculated risk, and that calculation reveals their underlying strategy.
Which is what exactly?
Addis Ababa understood that their geographic and demographic weight in the Horn of Africa made them indispensable, even if they were being, uncooperative.
So by walking away on the GRD, they were signaling they weren't desperate.
Exactly. They prioritized sovereign control over the dam above any desire for a warm, fuzzy relationship with the U.S.
Wow. So they were saying a functional relationship is nice, but we aren't going to beg for it.
Right. They had absolutely no urgency for a broader alliance.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. If Ethiopia didn't care about U.S. favor back then, and they were fine maintaining this cold distance, what actually broke the stalemate?
It's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, what forced them back to the table with Washington now if it wasn't some sudden change of heart?
It was an external shock. The catalyst wasn't even internal to the U.S.-Ethiopia relationship. According to Hudson's analysis, the real trigger was Washington's policy toward a completely different third party,
Wait, a third party? Who?
Eritrea.
Oh, wow. So what specific U.S. move regarding Eritrea changed the math for Ethiopia?
It was the news that the U.S. might lift sanctions against Eritrea. Yeah, to understand the gravity of that, you have to look at the power balance. For years, Eritrea has been heavily sanctioned, diplomatically isolated, economically constrained.
Which basically neutralized a major rival for Ethiopia.
Exactly. It allowed Addis Ababa to operate as the undisputed heavyweight in the Horn.
And the moment Washington signals those sanctions might go away.
The entire equilibrium shatters. Lifting sanctions means Eritrea can suddenly attract foreign investment. They can modernize ports, openly purchase arms, forge new security partnerships.
Suddenly, a constrained rival is unleashed right on their border.
Exactly. And the math completely changes.
So instead of just, sitting back and letting Washington rearrange the neighborhood, Addis Ababa does something really counterintuitive here.
They step right in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We usually assume big superpowers pull all the strings, right? That when the U.S. shifts policy, smaller nations just absorb the impact.
Right, they just adapt to the new normal.
But the text notes that Ethiopia demonstrated intense strategic agency. They aggressively grabbed the steering wheel to shape U.S. relations.
And assuming smaller nations just passively endure great power decisions is honestly a major blind spot in global politics.
So Ethiopia sees this threat from an unsanctioned Eritrea, and they don't wait around.
Not at all. They engaged Washington actively to ensure their own interests were baked into whatever new diplomatic framework was forming.
I mean, I have to challenge the extent of this agency, though. Ethiopia has been grappling with severe, devastating internal conflicts, massive economic hurdles.
Oh, absolutely. The internal vulnerabilities are severe.
So how much strategic agency can a deeply fractured nation actually wield against a superpower? Aren't they essentially negotiating from weakness?
Well, that's the paradox of the Horn of Africa. Strategic agency isn't about being immune to domestic crises. It's about knowing exactly how much international leverage you possess, despite those crises.
So they know Washington needs them more than Washington cares about their domestic issues.
Exactly. Ethiopia understands that Washington's geopolitical anxieties right now outweigh its concerns over Ethiopia's internal politics. Addis Ababa knows they are the indispensable anchor state.
They use that massive geographic and demographic weight as a wedge.
Right. They force Washington to engage on Ethiopia's terms rather than just taking dictation from afar.
Okay, but to really grasp why Washington is so anxious, we need to pull the lens back.
We have to look at the broader chessboard.
Because Ethiopia didn't pull this off in a vacuum. The text makes it clear you cannot understand this dynamic without looking at the Red Sea corridor.
The Red Sea is the absolute center of gravity here. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we are talking about the Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
Right, the choke point.
Yeah, it's a narrow passage that dictates the flow of global maritime trade between Europe and Asia. What used to be a local neighborhood concern is now a global security imperative.
And it's not just the shipping lanes, right? The analysis points out the Red Sea is this hyper-competitive arena now.
Highly competitive. You have Gulf states like the UAE and Saudi Arabia aggressively projecting influence.
Building military installations, securing port access up and down the coast.
Exactly. And on top of that, you have the total collapse of stability in neighboring Sudan.
Sending refugees and arms across borders. The whole region is a tinderbox.
Which brings us starkly back to Washington's perspective. When the U.S. looks at that deeply volatile map Gulf powers competing, Sudan imploding, securing the Suez Canal, Ethiopia stands out.
As an unavoidable variable. I mean, it's a nation of, what, 120 million people?
Roughly, yes. With one of the largest standing militaries on the continent. Geopolitically, it is a massive opportunity to anchor stability.
But at the same time, it is a massive liability.
Immense liability. The internal conflicts, ethnic tensions, unresolved border disputes. It makes Ethiopia an incredibly dangerous basket for Washington to put its eggs into.
You know, it sounds like from Washington's perspective, Ethiopia is the ultimate high-risk, high-reward investment. It almost reminds me of trying to operate a highly unstable nuclear reactor.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, like from the U.S. perspective, Ethiopia is the reactor. They desperately need the energy output, the regional stability, the counterweight to the Gulf, all of that.
But if they engage recklessly, they trigger a meltdown.
Right. If the internal dynamics fracture entirely, it's a catastrophic regional meltdown. They can't walk away from the facility, but they're terrified of what happens while they're standing inside it.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. Washington simply does not have the luxury of bypassing Ethiopia. The geographic realities are just too overwhelming.
So strategic distance, like they had during the GRD dispute, is out the window.
It's no longer a viable option for either side. The external pressures of the Red Sea have forced them into this pragmatic recalibration.
So what does this all mean? We have two nations that don't really trust each other in a tinderbox region, driven together by fear of external threats.
Purely by fear and pragmatism, yeah.
How do they actually structure a relationship out of that?
Hmm.
The media points to these new bilateral frameworks and official dialogues and sells it as the dawn of a warm alliance.
And that is exactly what Dr. Negusu's breakdown of Hudson's work warns us against. Those bilateral frameworks are absolutely not evidence of a restored friendship.
They aren't.
Not at all. They serve a much more clinical purpose. They are institutional mechanisms engineered to manage cooperation alongside deep, ongoing disagreement.
Oh, going back to our reactor analogy, these agreements aren't about generating warmth. They are the control rods.
Exactly. They are highly engineered, heavily negotiated systems inserted into the relationship to absorb the friction.
So it's not a marriage certificate. It's a heavily negotiated prenup. They are building a system that allows them to argue safely.
That is the essence of it.
Right.
They need to be able to argue aggressively over human rights or regional policy without accidentally severing the core security relationship.
So we are moving from diplomatic romance to strategic risk management.
Completely. Diplomacy rarely moves in grand cinematic turning points. It evolves through gritty, incremental adjustments to shifting incentives.
Both capitals just realized an unstructured relationship is too dangerous.
Right. Without these frameworks, these control rods, a single disagreement could spiral. It could hand outsized leverage to Gulf powers or let the chaos in Sudan completely overwhelm them.
Taking this journey through Dr. Negusu's analysis really gives you, like, X-ray vision for reading international news.
It really does change your perspective.
We started this deep dive talking about the celebratory, superficial headlines. But now, for you listening, when you see a press release about a strategic reset, you're equipped to look for the pragmatic survival instincts driving it.
It requires you to look way beyond the performative aspects of statecraft.
Yeah, you can see how a policy shift thousands of miles away, like Eritrean sanctions, violently alters the mass and forces new alliances.
And you recognize the high wire balancing act middle powers perform. They aren't passive pieces on a board. They actively manipulate great power anxieties to secure their own sovereignty.
But, you know, stepping back and viewing the board this way, it's a little unsettling.
Well, this raises an important question, actually. If structured dialogue is now primarily a containment system for managing risk rather than a foundation for building trust,
Yeah.
do traditional concepts of allies and friends even exist anymore in highly contested regions like the Horn of Africa? Or are we entering an era of purely transactional global survival, where nations only engage to mitigate the damage they might otherwise inflict on one another?
Wow, that is a brilliant and incredibly sobering thought to carry with you the next time you read the World News section.
It really makes you wonder.
It makes you wonder how many historic alliances being announced today are actually just two nations desperately trying to install control rods before the reactor breaches.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives, look for the hidden leverage, and we will catch you next time.